This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, who also, of course, is the local MP for Surrey South West, who's agreed to give the Guildford Dragon an interview. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving your time for this interview. Of course, you're currently the MP for Surrey South West, but soon the boundaries will change, and you'll be a candidate in the Godalming and Ash constituency. So, and of course, some of that comes into Guildford Borough area, which we cover. First of all, I want to talk a bit about your background. You went to school at Charterhouse and you live in Hambledon Village, south of Godalming. How important do you think your local roots are when representing this constituency?
I think they're really important because for all voters, things that matter to them are a combination of the local and the national. And people around here know that the main thing you're voting in a general election is who you want the government to be. But I grew up in a village called Shear. I learned to swim at Cranley Leisure Centre. Guildford is where I've done my Christmas shopping since the age I was able to do shopping. And you know, one of my earliest memories when I told my grandfather, who lived in Godalming all his life, that I was scared of the police as a sort of 7-year-old boy, he marched me up to a policeman in Godalming High Street, and it's just the deep conservative roots I have. And he says, "You need to meet a policeman,"
Right.
and then you'll discover that they're not scary; they're doing a very important job. And I remember my grandpa doing that. So, look, I think for people locally who've lived here many years, they worry that we're losing the special character of the area because it's changing so much.
Yes, I want to go into that a bit later. But what I wonder is, do you feel that with your local connections, you still have your feet on the ground and you are genuinely in touch with the concerns of your constituents?
I definitely like to think that. These are very smart electorate, very educated, and I meet them the whole time. So I think there are definitely advantages in being local, but in the end, people are making a choice about not just the local thing, but have I been a good chance of the Exchequer? Do they want a Conservative government? Do they want to change to a Labour government? And I recognise that.
Thinking of the constituency again, how well do you feel you know Ash?
Ash, less well. I'm getting to know Ash. I've been up there a lot, and there are some wonderful people in Ash. And they have, in a way, they have very similar concerns to many people in Guildford and the outer parts of Guildford. They've had a lot of new housing built in Ash. There's
Yes.
a lot of concern about whether they're getting the support for the infrastructure to go alongside that. And I've been engaging with Ash Parish Council about some of the roads issues. What they do have in Ash, which they don't have in, for example, Cranley, is very good train connections. But in particular, Ashvale Station does not have step-free access.
No.
And that means that for older people, it's a particular challenge getting up those steps. So that's something I'm trying to sort out.
Right. Now, moving on to a recent quote, you were reported as saying that £100,000 was not a huge salary for people in southwest Surrey. Can you imagine how that must have sounded to the majority of local residents who, even here in supposedly affluent Surrey, which has its own areas of relative deprivation, as I'm sure you know, can you imagine how they would have felt? Because they can never hope to earn that much.
Well, I can imagine how they might have felt when those comments were taken out of context, as I'm afraid they often are. But if you actually read, I was having a conversation with a young mum who said to me very openly, my husband's earning over 100 grand, but I have a mortgage, I have childcare, and I am finding it hard to make ends meet. And my observation to her was, well, I understand for someone in your situation, and there are many people like that in this area. 100 grand isn't as much as people outside might think. But, to the charge that, we're in politics, Martin, and people try and throw these things at you that what about people on much lower salaries? All I would say is look at my track record as Chancellor. I haven't been cutting taxes for the better paid. I haven't touched inheritance tax, much as I think it's an iniquitous tax. I have cut national insurance for someone on the average salary, which is £35,000 nationally, only a little bit more than that locally. That's a saving of £900 this year. So my focus has been on people on lower pay, because in a cost of living crisis, those are the people who are finding it the hardest to make ends meet.
But you can imagine that someone who is on, say, between 20 and 30,000 will think, does this chancellor really understand my predicament?
Well, look what I've done for them. I mean, first of all, if they're on that level of salary, I've increased the national living wage to over £11 an hour. That means this year alone, if they're working full-time on the national living wage, which someone at that salary level might be, they'll get another £1,800 in their pocket, added to which their national insurance charges will be 4% lower. So I have focused really heavily on those people because I know how tough it is. And one of the benefits of that has meant that despite the cost of living crisis and despite inflation being at 11%, we haven't seen unemployment go up a lot. And most companies have been able to continue to expand. And that, I think, is very important. But, if you're on a low salary in Guildford or Godalming, with the high cost of living here, it's particularly challenging. And I've really thought hard about what I can do to help people in those budgets.
Do you think there are some things beyond any chancellor's capability, because you can't bring house prices down to affordable levels for those kind of people, much as you might like to?
What I've learned, Martin, is that you don't control what this month's inflation number is, or this month's growth number is, or this month's unemployment number is. But you have enormous control over whether we turn the corner in, 2, 3, 4 years' time, whether we're more competitive as a country. And when I became Chancellor, we had inflation of 11%. The Bank of England was saying we were going to have the longest recession in 100 years. Inflation's come right down, partly because of some very difficult decisions that Rishi Sunak and I took. And the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, said a couple of weeks ago when I was in Washington that the UK economy is going to grow faster in the next 6 years than France or Germany or Japan. So I think you can have influence over what's happening in the medium term. And, I'll just say this comment. I think the UK is a fantastic country. And whichever party people vote for, I think we've got so much going for us. And one of the most exciting things for younger people, who are often on those lower salaries that you were talking about, is that over the last decade, we've built a third largest technology industry in the world after the United States and China, double the size of Germany's. And that means a lot of tech jobs around Guildford and Godalming and Cranley. That means great opportunities for young people.
Okay, but it still isn't going to buy them a house, is it?
No, and I think that's why what we need to do is to think what we can do to help them. The biggest thing I can do to help them afford a house is to start getting inflation down. And so what that means is that real wages, that's what wages are after inflation, are going up. And they've now been going up for 9 months.
Okay, so you alluded to the amount of development in Ash and the amount of development generally in the area, and indeed across the county, is leading many to fear a change of character in the area they feel close to. And this is all happening on the Conservative Party's watch. Your party takes considerable donations from developers. In Guildford, we have a widely disliked huge development underway at the railway station, which, despite it being unanimously rejected by the Borough Council, was finally approved by a Conservative Secretary of State. People say that your relationship with developers is too close. Why should people vote Conservative if they want to conserve the character of this area?
Well, the first thing I should reassure you about is that government policy is not in any way at all dictated by developers.
So why do they give you the money?
Well, we collect donations from all sorts of people, but we also get votes from a lot of people who don't want developments, and we have to do the right thing for the country. And this is the thing where, I must be honest with you, I've changed my view over the 19 years that I've been an MP. I arrived as a Surrey boy who grew up in Sheer, saying, above all, I don't want any more overdevelopment because I want to protect the character of the area. And then I met someone fairly soon after I'd been elected in London. And he said, "Oh, I grew up in your area. I grew up in Godalming." I said, "Where do you live now?" "Yarmouth." He said, "I couldn't afford to buy a house in Godalming." And I began to think about this. And the character of our area is also about not becoming a dormitory town for people who earn six-figure salaries in London, and not becoming a town where young people in their 20s and 30s can't afford to live here. And I do think we have to get a balance. We need to find a way of building houses that are in character with the local area, with the necessary infrastructure. But I don't think we can say no to all development. So I argue to my own constituents that we need to get that balance right. And I think that it is genuinely very difficult to do it. But I have yet to meet a voter, even ones who are concerned about overdevelopment, who, when you say, "Yes, but would you like your children and grandchildren to be able to afford to get onto the housing ladder locally?" they say yes.
Okay, now part of the pressure on new development is the population increase. And it's a fact that there have been unprecedented levels of net migration in the country, and that must be exacerbating the housing crisis. Your government has chronically failed to reduce immigration despite its promises. These immigrants, a lot of them are very good people, but they represent the need for new houses and all the infrastructure, schools, healthcare, road space that goes with it. Isn't this a real problem? And do you think that your government hasn't properly managed immigration?
Well, let's attack that issue head on. First of all, the British people voted 52% to 48% for Brexit. And one of the main reasons many people voted for Brexit was that they wanted to be able to control migration from the EU. And this was the government that actually gave people that vote and said the people can make this decision. And we now are no longer part of the single market, and we do control our migration. Shortly after that vote, a few things happened where we had a moral obligation to allow people to come here, which I think now, and as I thought then, was the right thing to do. The crackdown by the Chinese government in Hong Kong, which I strongly against, meant that we had an obligation to people from Hong Kong. Then we had the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and there were people who've helped the British Army as interpreters, and I think we had an obligation to help them. And then I've just come back from Ukraine, and people in Godalming, where we are now, open their arms to families from Ukraine, and I think Ukrainians are the bravest people on the planet. So there are some particular reasons. But your big point is right. We need to reduce migration, and we need to, if we're going to do that, we need to upskill our own people so that there isn't always the demand to bring people from overseas, and that means improving the education system.
But this isn't a new problem. Why is it taking so long?
Well, I think we've got some new, I do think it's a new thing actually. We've left the EU. Education standards now in England have risen to their highest levels ever. So we're really improving the standards of our education system. We have the best universities in the world. And what I would say is that, I'm going to just talk about the general election.
I'm just worried about time.
I know, but I would say that at this general election, there is a very clear choice. The Conservative government has a plan for this. We say, improve our education, control migration, stop illegal migration. And the Labour Party doesn't have a plan, and they want to stop the Rwanda scheme. They've got nothing to put in its place. So I agree, it was a big issue to tackle, but my argument would be we have plans to do that.
Okay, now I'd like to move on to Thames Water and that situation. There are proposals that have been publicised about Thames Water asking for up to 44% price increase. At a recent public meeting, you said you I think turned to the chair of Ofwat and said that would be completely unacceptable. What is your most recent feeling on that? The company is 15 billion in debt, and they're still moving around dividends, although not paid out directly to investors, to their subsidiary companies. What has to be done now?
Well, I think that Thames Water has behaved shockingly badly. I think it's been very badly run. Um, by the way, saying this is about privatisation, in my judgment, is a red herring because there's only one company in the UK performing worse than Thames Water, which
We
is
covered
Scottish,
your answer in the meeting, yes.
yeah, which is Scottish Water, and that's still nationalised. So I don't think this is about privatisation, but we do need to improve the regulation of privatised utilities. And I think some of the way that previous Thames Water owners behaved was frankly disgusting. So I thought that public meeting was significant because I got a public undertaking from Ofwat that whilst we may see bills go up here and around the country because rightly we think we need to invest more to stop sewage being pumped into our rivers, and that is a big capital expense. I do not want them to see them to go up by more in our area because Thames Water have been so lousy, and they made that public commitment. So when Ofwat decide later this year how much the bills are going to go up by, I'm going to be looking at the rest of the country, and I'm going to be wanting to satisfy myself that they have not gone up by more in the Thames area.
Do you think Guildford customers have a special case?
I think Guildford customers, Godalming customers,
Godalming, yes.
have borne the brunt of a company that has been very badly run, and I think more significantly, very badly owned, because I think the previous owners of Thames Water have neglected by ramping up debt, have turned a company that they started off with no debt into one that is very vulnerable, and they bear a lot of responsibility for that.
I've got one further short question. There has been some speculation whether you really you're determined to stand at the next election. Can you actually put an end to that now? Are you definitely going to stand?
Yes, but by the way, I've put an end to this many times. And Martin, my commitment to the area, if people look at the amount of time I spend knocking on doors and delivering leaflets, and I'm down here the whole time. Let me say this: it would be the privilege of my life to represent the village I grew up in, and that's what I'm fighting for. But it is the tightest battle I've ever fought.
A recent poll showed that you were slightly behind the Lib Dem candidate here. I know it's only a poll, but are you confident of winning?
No. I think I am probably behind the Lib Dems as things stand now. And so, strange though it might sound, I think the Conservatives in this area are the underdog, and we're going to give it everything we have because we want to represent this beautiful area.
Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor of the Exchequer, thank you very much.
Thank you.